Well, let's. That's a good way to get into the prints that are here in the museum. I'm sitting in front of the running owl, which is a etching in Shinkalee. So I'm going to turn my camera around so you can see it, and then we can chat a little bit about that Shinkalee process a bit more. So for folks that aren't familiar, the Shinkalee is that sort of greenish seafoam color in the background of the print. And so it's actually a layer, an entire layer that is printed into the paper, right, Paul?
Yeah, here's a piece of shin that lifted off when we were pulling the print. You can see how thin it is compared to the base stock, which is the ash here. This is a 300-gram ash made of rag, whereas the shin is made from the cadmium of the kozo, what do you call it, shrub in Japan. So we're combining, sorry for jostling around, we're combining the two papers, sandwiching them with a rice glue between, and then running the print through. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so if we're looking at this print in particular with running owl, so the image of the owl, which is black ink, and it looks like maybe even a little bit of Aquatint in there actually with the gray tones, that's the part that is actually printed with the ink. And then the remainder of the image is actually the Shinkalee. And it looks like that the Shinkalee has little threads, and so it is a handmade paper, and it has little threads of color that sort of break up the flat tone.
Yeah, one thing I like, I'm appreciating in this regard is that to start with, the whole thing with the Inuit printmaking originated out of James Houston's curiosity about how they could apply the principle of printing in the north using their soapstone. And so he went over to Japan and worked with a printmaking master in woodblock, which he then, after concluding the course, came back to Cape Dorset and applied to the surface of the stone. So using the Japanese paper is in a way sort of a nod to the origins of printmaking in Cape Dorset.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
sure. How long have you been using it within the Dorset, or other Inuit artist prints?
I'm going to say about 3 years, give or take. It was an evolution of things, 2 or 3 years, something like that.
Sure, but this is the translation is bright evening, Silakituk, and one thing with the prints, particularly like this, Paul, I feel like are very recognizable for your studio. When we see these prints, we go, oh yeah, that's definitely a Studio PM work. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that Aquatint technique and how it creates that glow, because I think there's this sort of glowing in the ink that I think really works with the plates that you're doing.
Well, traditionally the Aquatint is built into the plate with a rosin, sprinkled rosin dust, which is heated and then solidifies, giving you a textured resist on the metal. And then when one etches that, the acid eats everywhere the rosin is not. In our case, I should admit that we're skipping a lot of that just by the nature of the fact that steel etches with a granular surface all of its own. I do sometimes use the rosin approach, but only when it's really a heavy duty requirement. So here, the Aquatint is this textured surface, and there's been more of an etch here than there has been here in this area. So this might be, I'm going to say, about 5 to 10 minutes in the acid, and this might have been 45 to an hour. So having etched the first portion, the bottom half of the plate, that gets blocked, meaning covered with paint. and then we put the plate back in the acid, and it gets etched further. And then all these dots are sprinkled in the process, and then the tone is worked back with sandpaper and a burnisher for the highlights here, for the character in the snow and so on. Okay. Here's another plate of Hakabau, and similarly, and this was edition this year. Similarly, this is more clear cut. So you've got these areas that were blocked after like 1 minute, 2 minutes max. And then these areas with the light etch was probably 40 minutes. And then certain amount of burnishing, scraping, sandpaper and whatnot. This area didn't get etched at all in comparison.
Yeah, and that is the distinguished bear, which is right over here. I'm going to put my camera on here if I can find a good spot to look at it. Here we go. So you can see that plate, and then you can see the print that is here in the museum on my camera. And yeah, that one in particular really pops out because the background is so clean on the plate that you can really see how that image is created within the plate.
And it is Noy's expertise and artistic ability that makes it all possible. The other thing I should mention, well, for instance, the brown in the outline of the bear is done by hand. After he's done the yellow and the white blend, he goes back with a brush and ever so carefully paints in the line and so on and so forth. The colors in the cane and the pipe and so on are hand colored after with dry pastel.
I guess I'll ask, in a more general sense, Paul, do you have thoughts about how or if the series has changed over the years since you've been, working with them, with the Dorset series in particular, since you've been printing them, have you noticed any changes in terms of subject or the way artists are approaching their work? Or
very much so. I'll be honest. At the outset, it was much more of an unconscious, automatic approach with a lot of the artists. I'm thinking of somebody like Shujuk's work, childlike and whatnot. With the passage of time, of course, the culture is exposed to TV to begin with, and now the internet. So the younger generation is much more sort of illustrative as opposed to sort of automatic, if I could say it that way. And not to take away from either, but I do love and miss those days when it was sort of really gangbusters, and not so deliberate, not so, how should I put it, detail work,